Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Conference of Consulting Actuaries Leadership Development Interview Series. My name is Michael Clark, host of the podcast and former president of the CCA and managing director at Agilis based in Denver, Colorado. I'm joined today by my guest, Andy Peterson. Let me give you a quick introduction to Andy. Andy is the managing director for international at the Society of Actuaries based in Schaumburg, Illinois. In his role, Andy oversees the SOA's activities outside of the U.S. in advancing the actuarial profession through education and research. He works with the SOA's board to establish the organization's international strategy and to oversee the work of volunteers and staff around the world. But beyond the professional, a couple of other interesting tidbits I found out about Andy from checking out his LinkedIn profile. On his LinkedIn profile, he says that the things that he values are faith, family, and friends. And then in his spare time, he likes to spend time with family. That makes sense. He's a distance runner. He plays the French horn, and he likes to travel, which obviously he's done a lot of in his current role. So, Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, no, this is going to be great. I think there's a lot of good things that you'll be able to comment on and talk to us about that I know people will find interesting. But I want to start getting into just your career journey. Like you're a staff actuary at the SOA now, but talk to us for a few minutes about how your career began as an actuary and what led you to what you're doing today.
Yeah, sure. I kind of feel like I'm a bit of an accidental actuary in the sense that I didn't go to college thinking I was becoming an actuary. I didn't learn about the profession until halfway through my undergraduate, or maybe somewhere in the middle of my time at university. We had a alumni come back and speak to our math majors. I was in math, but I was focusing on secondary education, so I was intending to be a high school teacher, and learned about the actual profession from this alumni who spoke to our students. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, here's another career that actually uses math skills and doesn't involve the teaching. And I kind of thought, well, that's intriguing. But I didn't immediately like transfer or something like that. I was already, enough into my university career and I was at a small liberal arts school, so we didn't have a actuarial program. So I learned a little bit about it, did a little bit of research, but even that was kind of pre-internet days. So I think I wrote off to the Society of Actuaries and got one of those little booklets they used to send with the sample test questions and some other material and that sort of thing.
And you were like, oh, great, a math test. I can be in a profession where I get to be tested on math.
Yeah. Although, yeah. I learned, that you need an internship that'll help you get into a full-time job, but I didn't know how to get an internship because I just didn't have any connections about that, despite having this one alumni. And actually, it's kind of ironic. I was thinking about this as I was preparing for the interview. I believe it was right around Easter time. My current wife, then girlfriend, and I were actually in the Chicago area for Easter. We went to her uncle's church and happened to meet an actuary there after the Sunday service. And that one thing led to another, which led to him hiring me as an intern at what was then the Wyatt Company. And the internship went well, and that led to a full-time job offer on the contingency that I actually had to pass an exam before they'd offer me the job, because of course offering I wasn't your traditional candidate, not having come through an actuarial program. So you kind of, my boss then needed, to be able to justify hiring somebody without any actuarial background. So I did manage to get an exam. I guess at that point it was 100 passed during my senior year of college, and that led to the full-time job and that sort of thing. And I worked for what was then the Wyatt Company that evolved into Watson Wyatt. And I guess I left a year before the Towers Watson merger. So yeah, worked in Chicago, did a expat assignment in Zurich, Switzerland for 3 years, and back in Chicago. And then around 2008, I got a call from a recruiter that was trying to find somebody for my original role at the Society of Actuaries, which was the staff fellow supporting our retirement pension actuaries. And I wasn't out looking for a job, but it intrigued me enough that I started talking to them and then got interested in it. And, that kind of led to the switch. So yeah.
So getting into the actuarial profession, then do you, given the story, I mean, do you consider it divine intervention?
Yeah, a little bit of providence there. Yeah, there's all sorts of funny stories on that side of things, but yeah, I could definitely feel that to a certain degree. Yeah.
No, that's excellent. So you worked as a retirement consultant for about 15 years. Traditional pension plan consulting work, or?
Yeah, pretty much. I did, yeah. Started in a mix of yeah, it was always pension stuff, but it was a mix of corporate and public pension work. And then then when I went to Switzerland, it was doing a lot with international, multinational companies in that market. The advantage of working went from at that time the Chicago office was, I don't know, 200 people, and then I went to Zurich where we were an office of, I think, 12 when I got there, and we maybe grew to 20.
Wow.
But so you do a lot of different sorts of things when you're in a small office, got a lot broader breadth of things, working on ALM studies, on mergers and acquisition, just a lot of different things that I didn't get exposure to in Chicago, but then came back to Chicago. And yeah, again, just primarily corporate, Fortune 500 type.
What did you learn from that time in Zurich? Obviously, you mentioned you got exposure to a lot of things that maybe you didn't get when you were back in your Chicago office. Looking back on that experience now, like what were some of your biggest takeaways from that opportunity?
I think there was, on the actuarial side, some of it was just sometimes going back to first principles. So a lot of part of the value proposition of me being there was that I was able to bring expertise on U.S. accounting standards and even our proprietary systems that we used for the Wyatt company at that point, or I guess at that point we were Watson Wyatt, but our proprietary systems. So I had expertise in our valuation systems and some of those things, but even like taking U.S. GAAP, like application of that to foreign plans. It wasn't always straightforward. Is this actually a defined benefit plan or a defined contribution plan? In Switzerland, there were a lot of plans that looked a lot more like DC plans, but they had elements of guarantees in them. And so, the auditors would say, well, that's actually a defined benefit. And anyway, just some of these first principles, like, well, all right, does this apply? Doesn't it apply? How do you actually apply? Maybe things that were written for a U.S. context into a broader context. Again, just trying to go back to sometimes first principles of how you apply these things, especially even when I first got there, the guy who managed our office, my manager he was a Canadian actuary, but he'd worked in Europe for a number of years. And worked in the U.S. at one point as well. He reminded me, like, the code for U.S. pension plans is like 2 books that are like this thick. In Switzerland, it was like one little book, So again, it was much more principle based in how you approach things. So that was interesting. And then just the aspects of working cross culturally, dealing with. Oftentimes, I found myself a bit as the interpreter between, say, the U.S. Folks who are dealing often with their subsidiary organizations in an overseas context, and also even within our office, helping to kind of understand that, just silly little things of how we communicate and different expectations around things like that, different work styles. So those were helpful
Did
things for
it
me.
did it change anything for you when you came back to the US after that 3-year period in terms of how you worked?
I mean, it definitely was an adjustment coming back. I mean, I came back right as I was finished. I mean, I just finished my fellowship as I was coming back. So I was able to kind of step back into some slightly different roles when I came back. And that was good. When you're, yeah, I know that there's a lot of literature about, people go on expat assignments. They come back to their home country and they last about 2 years and then they're off to something else, or just because it's
Hmm.
not the same. Fortunately, I think I was able to do some things differently. So at least I was moving into a different role as opposed to purely what I'd had before. So that helped to some degree. And yeah, I mean, I think it made me a better consultant, is just learning how to ask questions in a different manner, maybe recognizing, I don't know, some of it's just maturity, but also just recognizing different communication styles and how to work with different types of people.
Yeah, no, that I'm sure that's invaluable. And I can definitely see that the benefits there. So you come back and you mentioned then you get this opportunity to go work at the SOA as their senior staff fellow for retirement systems. But you were in that role for a little bit, and then about 5 years ago, you moved over to being the managing director over the SOA's international um, strategy. I don't know what you'd want to call it. What led to
Okay.
that change? How did you go from being the senior staff fellow for retirement systems over to more of an international focus?
That was really it was a somewhat gradual change initially. I mean, I worked, yeah, I mean, I had about 10 years in the staff fellow role for, the retirement area. And over the last, let's just say 2 or 3 years, I started doing more, getting asked to do more board level projects that had nothing to do with specifically around my retirement role,
Hmm.
but just there were, one-off projects. They needed somebody to lead, board task force from the staff side. And so our CEO would ask me to step in on a few things. And so I think at some level it was just proving that I could handle tasks like that and take them, from start to completion. And I know I worked with, name a lot of people know Tanya Manning, and then I worked together on a project for several years when she was on the SOA board, and that was, it was a good experience for me as well to get exposure to our board members as they were, working with us and they cycling through us.
Hmm.
And then I guess there was an opportunity. We needed somebody to, some stuff was going on internally. We needed somebody to oversee our relationship with the International Actuarial Association. And so our CEO asked if I'd take that on, and that kind of gradually, then within the next sort of 6 months, it was like, all right, well, why don't can you take on the entire international oversight role for the SOA? So that was, I don't know, I guess actually almost 6 years ago. I was realizing as well that I'm just about to hit an anniversary date where I've been at the SOA for 16 years and was at my prior job for 16 years. So I don't know what the symmetry is there, but I guess the thing that's been good is that I've been, even though I had, maybe I'm a little atypical for people only having had two employers, but I've had that privilege of having some different roles within those employers. So that's allowed me to, find interest and keep engaged, as opposed to some people who I think who, bounce around a little bit more, but maybe because they're not getting the experiences they want. But yeah, I think that's, again, I kind of gravitated towards the international aspects. Our CEO knew I had expat experience in my background. I mentioned this before. I actually grew up overseas for most of my younger years. Lived in
Where was
Taiwan.
that? Oh, Taiwan. All right.
So I just had, that's kind of part of my DNA to a certain degree. I
Hmm.
mean, it wasn't until I was like 30 that I'd actually lived in the US as long as I'd lived overseas, so that's just sort of, it's something I gravitate towards. So that was helpful to
Nice.
have the
No, that's
opportunity.
No, that's great. And so it seems like the opportunities were there, and it was just finding, sometimes you found them, sometimes they found you,
Yeah, I think so.
which is great. Well, I do want to talk more about the Society of Actuaries international strategy, because I think some of our listeners probably only see the SOA as a credentialing and research organization in the US. Maybe you can help us understand, what is the SOA's international focus, and what is the organization trying to accomplish at a global level?
I mean, I would say we we believe and we see ourselves very much as an international organization today, and we really seek to be known as a global association. I would say that our desire is that we have over time that people really look at us as a global association that happens to have their headquarters in the U.S. Yes, we're historically a U.S. based organization, and that's still the largest percentage of our membership. It's 65% of our members roughly are in the US right now, but that means that 35% of members are outside now. Some are in Canada, but a good number are across the world, and even actually at a larger number, 45% of our candidates are outside of the US. So if you look at that, you can kind of see that over time the growth rates are higher outside the U.S. than inside the U.S. The profession's growing faster in places where there haven't been historical long history of having actuaries, and so we see that there's a value proposition for our education, our credentialing pathway, to try and help that growth and to continue to grow our membership. And we think that overall helps the profession globally to be stronger.
So it's not like you're looking to necessarily be the actuarial association in a given locale, but more either support associations that are already there, help facilitate from a credentialing standpoint where they might not have something in place already, and then help provide that the research and all of the stuff that the SOA is known for, but in those locales and on a global level as well.
Yeah, I mean we're kind of a unique organization when you look in the actuarial world, because there's a couple. I mean, obviously the CAS has similarities, although they're focused on one particular practice area, and the Institute of Faculty of Actuaries has some similarities as well.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, if you look at the 70 plus associations that are part of the International Actuarial Association, um, most of them are country specific, and
Mm-hmm.
and so whether it's the Canadian Institute of Actuaries or the Actuarial Society of Hong Kong or the Singapore Actuarial Society, they're all basically they're working within their national boundaries. Now, some of them have international components to it, and they reach out beyond their borders, but their primary focus is within their borders. And our desire is really to work with those local associations as much as possible. We will try and encourage those folks who become members of the SOA to also join the local association. Again, whether it's the American Academy of Actuaries or the various associations in Asia or whatever, and because we believe there is that local accountability and importance of local practice that's important. But we believe there still is a strong value proposition for our credentialing process, and in many countries there isn't a local credentialing process. So that's really where our focus is primarily. And in a lot of Asian countries, the SOA or an IFOA or a CAS credential, that's kind of the gateway to become a member of the local association, to have one of those credentials. That's sort of the means of becoming then a local member of, say, the Actuarial Society of Hong Kong, as an example.
Okay. So with your international focused role at the SOA, you've been able to see a lot of the different actuarial associations. You've been listing off a number of them here. Most recently, just following along from your LinkedIn profile, you were attending events hosted by the Institute of Actuaries of India. And it looks like you got there by way of Qatar and Dubai. as you've seen all of these different actuarial associations around the globe and actually been in their presence, like what observations do you have about the global actuarial profession?
Yeah. Well, first, I really do enjoy the opportunities to interact with actuaries and the associations around the world. And I think there's a lot that I learned from those interactions. I'd say at one level, many associations are dealing with a lot of similar challenges that we in the U.S. face. Actuarial profession in the U.S. There's the impact of data science, how artificial intelligence is going to change the work of actuaries, even just the whole aspects of building awareness for the profession and what actuaries, the skill sets we have, attracting talent, the perhaps the talent war that, well, war is the right word, but the talent challenges that we have with maybe other nearby professions. Again, getting back to data science, some of those things. So those are um, nearly universal things that I see around the world. You hear a lot about that when visiting other places. Again, the level of those challenges or the opportunities that vary in different markets. But there's also some key differences, particularly I would say with the locations and countries where the profession's more developing, where there's this long history of an actuarial profession. In those places, it's things like awareness at the very fundamental level, awareness that being an actuary is a viable career. In some markets, everybody knows if you're in a STEM field, well, it can be a doctor, accountant, or an engineer. That's sort of in some of these markets, and so an education process say, well, actually, you can have a good career path as an actuary too. Then in some places, it's just convincing even the local insurance industry that there's real value that actuaries can add beyond just kind of that pure number crunching person who signs off on the reserve statements, that there is a broader role than just the pure regulatory requirements, getting them to support development programs and see a value in doing that. Another difference I think I see is there's a tendency again in the newer markets for there to be a lot less specialization in actuarial work. So you and I, when we work in the U.S. context, you're not just a pension actuary. You're often a multi-employer actuary or public plan actuary, or there's these incredible
Very specialized,
subspecialties
yeah. Yep.
that works in the pension world. It's the same in in the insurance space, where whatever you're reserving, a pricing, a marketing actuary, all those things. In a lot of these developing markets, I'm an actuary, and I do general insurance one day, and I'm doing health the next day, and I'm doing a little bit of life, so it's much broader, the types of work they're doing, because of the necessity of that market. So yeah, those are, some of the issues that are going on and differences that I observe maybe.
So I want to tie back to some of the stuff that's on the SOA's website as it relates to the SOA board strategic plan. And this is just off their website. It says it's to drive solutions to life's financial risks with specific focuses on engaging, preparing, and providing. How does your work tie into the SOA board's strategic plan?
Yeah, so you're referencing our current purpose statement,
Mm-hmm.
driving life solutions to life's financial risks, and the kind of the key, I don't know, we call them goals around that, or outcomes that we seek to have. I think this engage, the words behind engage a diverse community to innovatively address key societal issues. I think that's really what we're trying to get engaging beyond just the U.S. context, right? So if you go back far enough in the SOA's history, I think we've always said we're a binational organization. If you look at your little seal on, I think that might be behind you,
Yeah.
with
Yep.
your SOA certificate, you've got a maple leaf and an eagle on that seal. But we've got members in 80 countries around the world. And so we want them to feel like they're part of that diverse actuarial community, that we are properly preparing them, whether they are sitting in Shanghai or Dubai or Bogota or Chicago, to have that ability to deal with financial risk and measure that, and measure and manage and mitigate the risks in whatever context, whether it's the insurance or consulting or pension, health, whatever particular applications they're doing. So I feel like really I'm just trying to do that in the broader sense, so that we're helping our actuaries globally feel like they're part of our SOA community.
And with what you're doing on the international scene as well, this just a thought that occurred to me. In the US, obviously, we've got a fairly, I think it's a highly regulated insurance industry. Some of these places where these associations are springing up, or they've been established for a little bit, they might not necessarily have the same type of regulatory regimes that we're used to seeing here in the US. Is the SOA do anything with helping on a societal level with some of the regulation and trying to help government officials think through like what regulations are or are not needed?
We haven't done a lot of that. That tends to get done more through the International Actuarial Association. They have a direct relationship with the International Association of Insurance Supervisors, IAIS, which is, again, kind of like a parallel organization to the IAA that really looks at supervision of insurance stuff. And so the IAA has worked with the IAIS to provide sort of what they call like capacity development seminars,
draft standards, things like that to help them think through like what needs to be regulated and looked at. And
so
that makes sense.
And they've done workshops and things like that. And we definitely, when we're going into newer markets, we seek to work to meet with the regulators. But we also, you have to be a little bit careful when you do that, because we don't want to step on if there is a local association, we don't want to step on the toes of the local association. Right. So we try and do it with them to the extent they exist, or at least, with their knowledge.
Yep.
Or in some cases there isn't a local association, so then we are talking to them. But most of the context there is really more, all right, trying to help them understand the importance of the actuarial role, and then pointing them to other resources if they need that assistance from the IAIS or some other organization like that.
So really the focus is on developing actuaries all over the globe and helping them have the skill set necessary to be successful wherever they're at. Is that a fair way to categorize it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So I'll go back to the SOA board's strategic plan. There's 4 key themes that are listed on the website as well. Emphasize education on skills, accelerate international growth, cultivate community experiences, and spotlight societal purposes. Talk to us about how those themes integrate with the work that you're doing.
Yeah, well, I mean, clearly that one of accelerated international growth is all about what I'm doing, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So, and there's a lot that we're doing in that context. As I've mentioned, I think we see significant opportunities for growth, especially in some key markets across Asia, Middle East, into Africa. Those are probably the areas we're focused on the most. A little, some in Latin America as well. Our team, the team that worked with me, we've expanded. When I started my international role at the SOA, I think we had 7 people on my team, 4 of whom are outside the U.S. And by the end of this year, hopefully, assuming we fill all the roles we've got budgeted, I think we'll have about 16 on my team. And again, only 3 of those 16 are in the US. So we are trying to grow, and that means doing things like getting local resources in international markets so that those people can really serve the local markets. We've got an office in Beijing, we have one in Hong Kong, we've got staff in Canada. We're just opening an office in Dubai and another one in Singapore this year. So again, they're all relatively small offices, 2 to 3 people in each office. But the idea is that we're getting our staff in local places where we have concentrations of members, so they can do things that are relevant in those local markets. So, we run professional development events. We have I think we're on year, I don't know, 7, 8, 9, something like that, for an annual event we run in China. About 400 participants. The entire, professional development event. I mean, it's like an event you go to in the US, except it's everything's in Chinese. So it's local content, local regulations, Chinese actuaries presenting to Chinese actuaries, facilitated by our Beijing office. And we do those sorts of things around the world. Now, they're not always in local language, because if you're working across Asia, then English tends to be the common language. But again, trying to have things that are locally relevant in those markets, and that sort of thing. And that really drives into these other things, that, the emphasis on education, again, locally relevant professional development. We're making changes in our credentialing pathway even as we speak. Perhaps you're aware that, or at least some of our listeners are aware, that we've announced changes to our fellowship pathway. Some of the key changes we're making there are specifically designed to make our fellowship pathway more relevant to our members outside the US. So, for example, we're trying to reduce the level of US regulatory content that's required, and it'll still be there, but it'll be in places that they don't necessarily have to go through in order to get it. So, an actuary in China doesn't need to learn a lot about US tax law, but there'll be other opportunities to get that content if you're still in the US, and otherwise, you don't have to take it if you're going to be an actuary in Beijing all your life. And similarly, even the reference I made a little earlier about how a lot of these actuaries are much more generalists as opposed to specialists. So another change in this FSA pathway redesign is that people won't have to take, there'll be like four courses that are part of the FSA redesign, or the pathway, in addition to the existing DMAC and fellowship admissions course. But of those 4 technical, practice area courses, you can do 2 in one practice area, but you could do 2 in a different one. So you don't have to do it like, you and I all probably did all everything was pension.
Yeah.
But if you want to, you can continue to do that. But you could do some general insurance with health, or life with investments, or whatever the mix and match is, so that we believe that'll again be a lot more relevant for our members outside of the US in particular.
I think that's really interesting, and I think that's probably something that we take for granted here in the U.S. is that there is that more generalist base outside of the U.S. And so that for a credentialing organization to be able to make sure that what they're testing on is relevant, you have to almost go down that road to say, well, we don't want you to just pick an area and specialize in it and be tested in that area. We want you to be tested in a few different things, so that you've got that core knowledge at a certain level that allows you to be the type of actuary for whatever jurisdiction you find yourself in.
Yeah. And so, again, I mean, these are just examples. We're trying to create community, the same way we have events, networking, opportunity, whatever, those sorts of things. Again, we're trying to build that around the world. Ultimately, my goal is that a member in, outside the US feels like they're getting the same value for their membership, dollars that they spend, their dues that they send to us every year. It's not just I'm sending it to the SOA so I can keep using my FSA, but they're getting value of that, whether they're sitting in the US or some markets outside the US.
Does that mean that from a research standpoint then too, the SOA will be looking to do more research programs internationally?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're already doing that. Some of our research is very principle specific, principles, so it's not nation specific.
Hmm.
Whether it's, I don't know, I mean, there was a recent thing I think we published on AI and sort of principles around AI. Well, that's not country
Yeah,
specific.
it's
You know,
universal, right? Yeah.
right. But then there's other things, when we do whatever, a mortality study on U.S. pension. Well, that's very specific, or U.S. The mortality improvement scales that we
Hmm.
publish for that get used in the pension context. Well, that's U.S. mortality. But there's other things. I mean, we're doing some. We're actually doing a project working with the social insurance system in Saudi Arabia on a mortality study they're doing, and we're basically providing project management oversight. Their staff are doing the work, but we're doing kind of the over shoulder guidance on how you actually do an experience study. We've got other things we've done. Looked at mortality improvement in China. Some other retirement studies in Asia. Just, I mean, a mix of things. We want to do more, but we've definitely, we've got a part-time resource that's part of our contractor who's part of our team and working in Asia to help us with that. And so, yeah, and Dale Hall, our managing director of our research area, is very, very clued in to trying to expand that focus of our research.
Yeah.
I
No,
think
that's
that's
excellent.
actually
Yeah.
a unique aspect. I mean, some of the other we have the biggest allocation to research of any association,
Hmm.
and the biggest team doing it. So I think that is something that is a value proposition that we can bring in and use as a way to cooperate with a local association. They can help bring expertise of the local expertise, maybe contacts of data sources or whatever we need, but we can bring in process and expertise on actually conducting the research.
No, that's all fascinating. And I think a lot of people will be surprised to hear some of that. I want to switch gears a little bit. We talk about how this is our leadership development podcast, and I want to talk to you a little bit about leadership and your experience there. So when you think about the people that you consider to be successful leaders, what traits do they have? How do they demonstrate their leadership? I'd love it, especially if you can think about it from that international perspective, right? You've worked internationally, you get a lot of international exposure with what your current role is. Like, how do you see people be successful leaders across the globe?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously leadership looks very different in different contexts culturally. Um, I, but regardless, I think there's, at least my view, that you need your expertise, your competence, but at some level, that's kind of assumed to be a given with a leader, right? Um, Beyond that, though, then I think regardless of culture, I think this whole idea of having integrity of character to me is key. I always look at it as you know, I mean, there's lots of areas of character that are important, but I think my experience, at least, is that a certain level of humility is good as a leader. Not, I think sometimes those who are just seeking leadership for leadership's point are probably not the good leaders. It's those who kind of end up in the. I mean, there's intentionality about it, but if you're also, I don't know, I guess just this concept of even some, I guess sometimes people refer to it as servant leadership. Perhaps
Hmm.
we talk a lot about at the SOA. We talk a lot about kind of leading from behind. Because as staff, we're trying. We do a lot of work with our volunteers. So our volunteers make our organization run. Right, we've got several thousand that over the course of a year that do some level of volunteering with us, and so whether it's our board or our committees, those people, we want them to be effective in their roles of leadership that they have. And so sometimes as a staff, it's like, well, how do we make them successful as leaders? We lead by helping them lead. And so there is kind of that balance there. I think there's important element of trust, developing trust with your teams, that you're open to new ideas, that helps your staff to be open, have a level of empathy. So that's showing kind of that, that you care, that you, that, um, yeah.
What I like about
Yeah.
what I like about those characteristics that you've listed out, and you alluded to this as well, that for someone to have those type of traits doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be the person in charge.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that idea of leading from behind or servant leadership and all the various traits that you listed are something that somebody can apply regardless of where they're at in the corporate ladder or in the hierarchy of an organization. Right. And so that really, I think, puts a new spin on what it means to be a leader. Right. It's
Yeah.
not necessarily about a title, but it's a lot about how you treat people.
Right. I think so. And I don't know. I suppose there's always interesting things going on, but like right now with our U.S. political environment, it's so crazy, but it just seems like there's a lot of lack of leadership in that. And I don't want to get political in this context, but just like character matters, right? And sometimes we use this example that it doesn't, but it does when it really comes down to who people want to follow and who people want to be associated with, and so ultimately, yeah, I mean, I think the short term you can do other things and shortcut those processes, but I think it's, over the long term, it's those things that we've been talking about that really matter. And yeah, I didn't give a lot of thought to this ahead of time about the international aspects, but I think those things kind of transcend boundaries. There are definitely different ways that leadership gets applied, and just a lot number of the Asian cultures are much more hierarchical and how they look at leadership, and who has roles of what the leader does versus what others do. And so that's definitely different than perhaps our more consensus driven approach that we have in the US context. But ultimately, I think the character is a key thing of how do you treat people, how people will follow you if you treat them with respect and empathy, and a desire to see them succeed as well, to see them develop. I think that's a key part too.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about some of your role models when it comes to leadership, who are they? How have you tried to emulate their examples in your day-to-day endeavors?
Yeah, I don't know. I think you can always, well, of course, there's all these, famous people that you can point to, presidents, or, the Abraham Lincoln, Winston Churchill types. And those people, obviously, I don't know. For those, I think there's, they were effective in their times, but sometimes I think a leader, there's leaders who are effective for certain situations, right, as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so, looking to what you can learn from them in those situations, but also realizing, I think that not everybody's got their flaws. So let's not put our leaders on a pedestal too much. But learn what you can. I've thought about, like, all right, maybe from different eras of my life. I had a high school coach who was, just, he was able to make everybody feel special and unique. I mean, he connected with you, but he also pushed us as young teenage athletes, and he could get the best out of us because he knew how to connect with us, but also to motivate. And so there was a kind of that empathy that he had, and that sort of thing. I think about one of my early, actually the guy who first hired me at the Wyatt Company, a guy named Bill Meyer, an actuary. He's retired now, but he was just really good about, bringing me along, and it was always about giving me opportunities, and so I think that's something that I see, like, how can I develop my team as well, give them opportunities, and allow them the space to do well. And maybe they're going to make a mess up along the way, but and having those kind of boundaries there, to and the desire to see me do well. I guess that was something that, I mean, leader, mentor, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, otherwise our former SOA, um, my former boss here at the SOA before I moved into the international role, guy Mike Boot, he was just he's retired recently, but he was really good at creating a culture of collaboration on our team. And so just, everybody felt comfortable with one another. Just even, team meetings, sometimes we do some silly icebreakers, but that helped develop camaraderie between the team, that we had a culture where again, I think there was trust, and it provided us the room to do our work. Even our current CEO, the SOA, Greg Heydrich, I think one thing I've learned from him is just this idea of, he's one of these guys who's an avid reader. He's always learning, and he's somebody who's always asking questions. So you can be sure that if you're going into him with a proposal, he's going to have a lot of questions for you. I think that's a good, it's a good trait as a leader, to be able to, ask, the staff. You're going to be able to defend your views and be able to justify what you're doing, and that sort of thing. So, just a few examples from my life, I guess.
No, I love it. I think those are all really good too. And they really do go back to that notion of servant leadership that you mentioned before, and being able to connect with people. Because it's not about just doing what I say, it's about helping people along, and bringing people along with you. And it's less about, hey, look at me, I'm the star of the show, I'm the one in charge. And it's more about, hey, here's our team, and here's what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to do it. And being able to provide some vision, but allowing people to be individualistic about it as well, and help people succeed in their own areas of expertise.
Yeah, I think so.
So when you look at the actuarial profession, what do you see as the imperatives for future successful leaders within our profession?
Yeah, I think maybe some of this would just be summaries of what we talked about before, but again, for actuaries, as you get credentialed and get through that process, everybody assumes you have the technical expertise. So that's kind of a given. But the thing we hear over and over again is, oh, well, actuaries don't have the soft skills, they need those other skills. But and so I think there's some truth to that, but I think there's also this, those are things you can work on. So I think really trying to have that focus of, all right, how do I get to be a better communicator, a better leader, and that sort of thing. I think, the things we've been talking about, finding mentors who you can talk to regularly, even if whether they're a manager or somebody just in your firm, or somebody you've worked with in the past that can be an advocate for you, or advisor. I think those are good things to do. I think that, in this current environment, there's so much you can get through kind of this desire for continuous learning. There's so many opportunities out there. You should never have an excuse to stop learning, because it's, whether it's, stuff available on LinkedIn Learning or Coursera, or a lot of business schools have these free courses that they put out there, or lunch and learn type webinars that they host, and a lot of them are often probably kind of teasers to get you into their MBA program, but there's a lot of good content out there, and whether or just reading good books that are on leadership or other things. Like, you can overwhelm yourself, but I think having a goal to have some of that as part of what you do on a regular basis, I think that's important. Beyond that, I guess, just maybe if you're talking about the profession broadly, I do feel like we're at a bit of an inflection point, particularly with this interesting point of where we are with AI and some of the other technological shifts that seem transformative in terms of where we are. I guess we'll maybe look back on 5 years from now and see if that's indeed the case or not. But I do think as a profession, we need leaders, whether it's at the SOA or the CCA or other associations, that are able to see big picture, that aren't caught in the current paradigm of, well, we've always done things this way, so we need to do it the same way going forward. And I think that's a challenge that we deal with at the SOA, and even as it relates to our credentialing pathway, it's a rigorous credentialing pathway, but does everybody want to, you know, do that in the future? And how do we continue to remain relevant? So,
Mhm.
so those are, balancing just getting those people who have that vision and that ability to think outside the box, but also still, have those core skills that we talked about earlier, the empathy, the compassion, the some of those other skills of leadership that are important to bring people along with you in that process.
No, I like that. I mean, especially around continuous learning, adaptability, all of those things that, and I think you said it really well. We are at an inflection point, right? And so being able to adapt and know how you can take those foundational skills and apply them in new ways, or all of those, I think you're exactly right, is what's going to make or break successful leaders in the future, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank my guest today, Andy Peterson. Andy, if people want to connect with you or follow what you're doing with the SOA, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Um, well, I'm happy to get an email, but probably the quickest way is actually just connect with me on LinkedIn, and then you can message me on LinkedIn and we can talk otherwise, if that's the easiest way. But yeah, email, LinkedIn, whatever works best.
And I will say you won't regret following Andy on LinkedIn. You get to see all the cool places he goes and the different actuaries around the world that he's associating with. It's definitely if it becomes your own actuarial travel channel, if anything. So it's well worth the time to follow him there. The CCA's leadership development community is open to any actuary. You can reach out to the CCA to join. I want to thank Shannon Peterson of the CCA staff for helping produce today's event. You can join us for upcoming CCA events and follow us online on social media and our website. Andy, thanks again for joining us, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Thanks for the invitation.